Is Gordon Brown right when he argues we need to stay the course in Afghanistan? The defence correspondent of the London Evening Standard, Robert Fox, in our Westminster studio this morning, while the Mail on Sunday columnist Peter Hitchens is in central London. Morning to both of you, gentlemen.
Morning.
Peter, let's start with you. Despite what the Prime Minister said this morning, is it time to bring our troops home?
Absolutely. What course is this that Mr. Brown says we must stay? What are we doing? There is absolutely no conception in this government of what our purpose is, of what success would look like. There's ridiculous talk of how we're going to sort out corruption in Afghanistan. You might as well try to drain the Pacific with a teaspoon, and he knows it. We'll fail to do that. Why not acknowledge failure now, admit the whole thing is a mistake, and leave before there are any more pointless casualties? It is becoming extraordinary watching the dishonesty and shiftiness of front-bench politicians of all parties who will not address the problem that this war has failed, is bound to fail, and all the casualties that we're now experiencing are purposeless.
Robert Fox.
How? How are you going to get them home? And what happens? What happens if you leave a vacuum along that border between Afghanistan and Pakistan? Unfortunately, we're in something which is not going at all well. That I agree. But it is part of a much bigger, complex global picture. And the line that Peter Hitchens is taking, we heard from Dr. Kim Howells earlier this week, that you can put up the shutters, pull up the drawbridge and start fighting terrorism from within inside the White Cliffs of Dover. We can abandon considering responsibilities beyond the channel. It's absolute nonsense. But I do think there has to be some major rethink of the whole Afghan campaign. And why we have got to the situation that we are today is that, sadly, it was allowed to drift. It was allowed to drift, first of all, because we got, as the UK and other allies, got caught up in the crazy adventure in Iraq with George W. Bush.
Peter Hitchens, how do you counter the doomsday scenario that Paddy Ashdown laid out yesterday, that if you pull out now, the Taliban will swap its roadside bombs for Pakistan's nuclear ones?
Well, I think that's actually ludicrous. There's no possibility that I can see that the Taliban is going to obtain control of Pakistani nuclear weapons. In any case, this is just a misreading of the whole situation. And the idea that Robert comes up with, that if we leave, that we will create a vacuum, is also absurd. Our presence in Afghanistan makes precious little difference to the struggles in which we are so feebly and ineffectually intervening, which are mainly about the misplacement of the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan, the desire of the Pashtun people not to be divided by the Durand line, and also internal Pakistani politics in which we have foolishly intervened in a ridiculous utopian desire to impose democracy on that country, and in doing so only managed to destabilize the only stable government that country had. I really do think that to suggest that we have any kind of wise, coordinated, coherent or intelligent strategy in Pakistan or Afghanistan that needs to be protected is the first point that needs to be questioned. There's nothing there. Nobody's thinking about this at all. It's a hangover of an emotional and irrational reaction to September the 11th, 2001, which was almost certainly misplaced in the first place, combined with the constant training of these bogeymen, the Taliban, which is an immensely complicated concept, and actually at one stage included President Karzai, who we wish to prop up, and Al-Qaeda, which is a franchise, not an organization, and frankly, again, can't be treated as some kind of centralized organization. If we're threatened by terrorism in this country, it's not going to be lessened in any way by the presence of troops in Afghanistan. If our enemies wish to kill British people, then we provide targets for them day by day in Afghanistan by sending our finest young men and women into this futile theatre of war where we've now lost 230 people. Imagine the response if 230 of our best young men and women, and probably 3 times as many others injured, 230 killed, perhaps 700 injured in the centre of London today. We'd all think, what is going on? What a terrible disaster. But because it happens over there, we pretend to ourselves that we're some ways protecting ourselves from terrorism by sending people out to act as targets for the Taliban.
Right,
I just don't see the logic of it. It doesn't make sense to me.
All right, Peter. Robert, where do you want to start with that then?
Well, I like the way people cast around words like ludicrous, and I don't think what Lord Ashdown was saying about the nuclear weapons can be dismissed so glibly. It's sort of columnist speak at its worst. I know the Americans, and I know some of our deep thinkers are very worried about the positioning of the Pakistan nuclear arsenal, to answer your question. We just don't know. and we don't know what these people could do. It's not that they're going to fire these weapons, but they will acquire the technology and they will acquire the parts. Actually, I agree with Peter Hitchens. The Taliban is extremely complex, and by the way, so too is Al-Qaeda. This idea, oh ho-hum, it's a franchise, it's just like Coca-Cola and Starbucks of the terrorist world. Not true. It's a mixture of lots of things. It is absolutely clear that it is regenerating in various parts of the world, not least in and around the area of Waziristan, South Waziristan, where the Pakistan army is now engaged, and with what success we can't know. But you go and talk to our allies, the French, who are not contributing more troops to Afghanistan, and for very good reasons too. They're so worried about the volatility of the new activities, not making too many headlines at the moment, but they will be on the front page very soon, of Al-Qaeda in North Africa. And it's third or fourth generation Al-Qaeda, and it has real relevance. I have come round to the view, unfortunately it was trumpeted in crude terms in the national security strategy of George W. Bush, but you do have to have a bifocal approach to this. Yes, you've got to be vigilant about the terrorist threat at home, but you do have to fight it and with your allies and with all possible means at distance. But this distance in Afghanistan, Pashtunistan, across the Durand line, the border line, never fully acknowledged, as Peter rightly says, that is part of the UK domestic security problem.
OK, Robert, you're drifting off at a slight tangent here. Let's just stick to what was said today. Briefly, can you get an administration as apparently as corrupt as Karzai's to change its spots?
No. And I think it's ridiculous that politicians talk in these terms. Either you're going to have to work with a corrupt and undemocratic administration and prop it up and acknowledge that that's what you're doing, as we have so frequently done in the past and will no doubt do in the future, or you have to say that actually we don't have any utopian purpose in this part of the world. It really isn't the business of Britain, which is not a particularly democratic country itself at the moment, as far as I can see, to go round the world telling other people how to run their societies. And in any case, we haven't the power to do it if we wanted to. We're now a medium-sized power. Our army is much too small for this sort of operation. It's hugely overstrained. The rotation is shortly going to become unbearable. We're going to start losing the most valuable cadres in our armed forces because they simply won't be able to stand it anymore, and nor will their families. We're going to withdraw. The Canadians, who've been through exactly the same experience as us, are already withdrawing. It seems to me to be idle to sit around and pretend that this is not so, and not to begin preparation for it. The sooner we begin to withdraw, the fewer casualties we'll sustain. I defy Robert or anybody else to give me any practical reason, any benefit to this country, which has resulted from this action or will result from it. The idea that terrorist attacks on this country are confected in Afghanistan is frankly not proven, to put it mildly. The terrorist attacks in this country recently have originated in this country, and that's another problem. It's very interesting that Kim Howells, a former frontbencher, has finally begun to speak out. I think the cracks in the surface of the consensus are beginning to show. All I'm saying is, why do we have to wait so long for politicians to find the courage which our military men display day in, night out, and day out, all the time in Afghanistan, just to admit that they were wrong and to pull out people who shouldn't be there?
Peter, thank you. Robert, I can give you literally 15 seconds, that's it.
The trouble is that the military commanders who are most experienced in Afghanistan would completely deny what Peter is saying. Leave the governance issue aside, it's complex but can be dealt with. None of the serious, deep-thinking commanders would agree with a pullout.
I think we can both agree that, all agree it's a tough one, that's for sure. Gentlemen, thank you so much.